Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today here at the MM+M Racial Equity Summit 2021. My name is Ritesh Patel. I am a Chief Digital Officer at Ogilvy in New Jersey, and I am joined today with an amazing panel. We're going to discuss equity in pharma. Specifically, the title of this is What's It Like to Be Black on a Pharma Brand Team? I think, we'll do more than that, but that's sort of the core of the subject. We've all seen what's been going on in the world. We are now addressing some really interesting issues that are facing us, and we thought it would be interesting to get a perspective as every pharma company starts to become, diverse, looks at diversity amongst its ranks, and look at it from a brand marketer's perspective and what it's like to be a person of color on that team. What needs to change? What kinds of things should we be focused on or addressing? So that's the topic that we're going to cover. For those of you who've participated in meetings that I've sort of moderated in this kind of arena, you'll also know that we tend to meander a little bit. While we'll stay true to the actual abstract of this conversation, there may be things that may come up as the participants speak. And also, don't forget the Q&A. If you've got questions that you want to raise, there's the Q&A button there that you can send us questions. And based on that, we may sort of move the conversation a bit. With that introduction and topic conversation, I would like to bring on the panelists for this conversation today. The first one is Charlotte Jones-Burton. Charlotte, can you join us? Hello, Charlotte. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us today. Get a quick introduction, please.
Hi, my name is Dr. Charlotte Jones-Burton. It's a pleasure and an honor to be invited today. I am currently associated with Otsuka, where I head up the global clinical development of nephrology, and I'm also president and founder of Women of Color in Pharma. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Next up, Conrad Kelly. Conrad, please join us.
Hey, Ritesh, how you doing?
Welcome to the panel. Please, quick introduction from you, Conrad.
So Conrad Kelly, I am currently with Merck, executive director working on social determinants and health equity. And I've been with the company about 11 years now, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion today.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, young Bill Nichols. Bill, can you join us as well? Hey, Bill.
Thank you, Ritesh. I'll be sure to give you the $2 for referring to me as young. I appreciate it. My name is Bill Nichols. I'm the vice president of commercialization at Bluebird Bio for our sickle cell asset. And really excited to get started here on the panel with Charlotte and Conrad and yourself.
Thank you so much for joining us. This is an interesting subject. We've had diversity initiatives in many industries. I've worked in a couple of industries, and I know in the last 5 years in the company that I'm in, we've been taking diversity seriously, etc. Maybe what we could start with, Charlotte, you've been at Otsuka for a while. How long have you been in pharma, and have you seen changes occurring in the last couple of years, or at least even this year?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I just would like to start by saying the views and insights that I share today are solely my own and not associated with any employer or organization that I'm associated with. So I've been in the industry for almost 15 years now, and I've been at 3 companies throughout my time in the industry. And as it relates to changes, I mean, who can speak during this time and not say we haven't seen changes? So absolutely, I have seen changes along the way within the industry, and look forward to diving a little bit deeper into that, the changes that I have seen.
Conrad, what about you? How long have you been in the industry? What's your story?
I've been in the industry around a similar amount of time, about 15 years or so, and had the privilege of working, for GlaxoSmithKline and Johnson & Johnson and now Merck, and I think you've seen an evolution in terms of the importance of DE&I. Certainly, the last year or so has really put an even brighter spotlight on that, not only because of the social justice movement, but also because of COVID. And the heightened awareness around the disparities that we're seeing of how COVID is really impacting certain communities of color. And so I think, it's been an interesting moment to really have to tackle the issues of racial and ethnic, equity, but also looking at disparities as, the government and companies are trying to figure out how do we address these gaps that we see in COVID, and also starting to spill over to see that those disparities also exist in other chronic conditions.
Yeah, I think COVID has actually shown us the cracks that are in the health system here in the US, right? But also probably globally. We are seeing inequities everywhere, but it's pretty acute here. Bill, what about you and your story? How long have you been in the industry, and what you're doing now? Have you seen any changes?
Well, thanks, Ritesh. I have been in the industry for over 20 years now, so I guess I'm not the young one in the group. But spent a lot of time at Bristol Myers Squibb, and I'm now at Bluebird for the last 2 years. I think the last 12 months has actually caused all of us to think differently about how the world functions, not just because of COVID, not just because of the social unrest, but the amount of information that's available, that's readily available through other platforms, really does cause us all to think differently about, there's not one version of the truth these days, right? And how do we get to the patients and the families that we look to serve in a way that is authentic, but also in a way that is very, very truthful and transparent?
I think we've got two things going on. One is about the people within the industry, the pharma companies we're working with, and one is the population, that base that we're serving, and the disparities we see there, right? If I could come back to us, Charlotte, you started. Were you, at any time feeling uncomfortable being the only person that was maybe black in a team, or were you always comfortable as you grew through your career? How did it start with you?
Yeah, so what I would say is I noticed an interesting phenomenon when I came into this industry. As a physician, I came in from academia into the industry, not necessarily realizing it was corporate America. So I was very naive at the time. And the phenomenon that happened is I was a very confident, articulate, smart person outside of the walls of my company. But then I entered into the walls of my company, and I actually saw a diminution of my personality, and that confidence, that intellect, it was being blunted. And so there was a bit of an imposter syndrome that was happening as I entered in. And it went on for a good portion of maybe 2 or 3 years before I really was able to identify what it was. And it absolutely had to do with being one of the only ones on the team who looked like myself. And it also had to do with the fact that there wasn't anyone that raised their hand to say, I'm going to help you and I'm going to explain to you, kind of this environment that you're in that's fairly complex, that really, looks at people who have a pedigree and puts them in a different manner in which they put you. And I really had to do a lot of work. And it's interesting. I came in, I was double board certified. I was an internist, internal medicine, and a nephrologist. So I had all of this training. I was a leader in my community. But when I got inside, that phenomenon happened.
So it must have been a stark difference to you. Were you practicing before you joined the pharma company? Because I'm sure that world is not the same, is it?
Yeah, it was a stark difference. I was practicing at an academic institution. I was NIH funded, and seeing patients as well. And then I came into the industry, and there was just this powerful force, this environment that wasn't inclusive. And it signaled to me that whether it was right or not, this feeling that I didn't really belong where I was. And that was very interesting. I now know that I'm not the only one that has that feeling. And I spend a lot of time working with others to ensure that they can overcome that if it happens to them fairly quickly.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to touch on a little later is this whole mentoring allyship thing around that, as you've experienced this, and how you can help some of the youngsters that are coming through as well. But it was a different time, and Conrad, were the experiences similar to you? You're now working in an organization. The CEO is African American. I know he's retiring soon, which is but was it different for you, or how did it go for you?
As I mentioned prior, I've had the privilege of working at three, extraordinary organizations. And so I've been able to really pick up pieces of the culture across all three. And so when I think about my experience, I kind of put it into two buckets. It's been both a privilege and a burden. And so when I think about the privilege, I've had a chance to work on introducing products that do have the opportunity to save and improve people's lives. I've had the opportunity to bring forth diverse ideas and to represent certain groups that often don't have a voice, inside the walls of these organizations. I've been able to bring in diverse suppliers and push our agency partners to really evolve their thinking, and also to be able to advance, various diversity, equity, inclusion, ideas and priorities within the organization as a leader of those teams. So whether that's racial and gender representation, pay equity, hiring people from diverse backgrounds. So you can't underestimate the value of, even if you're the only one on the team, how much it means to those, to your point, from mentorship, who are looking up and saying, because that person is there, then that means that I also have, an opportunity. But I think on the flip side, when you talk about the burden, and hopefully we'll dig into this a little bit, I think some of my experience has been having that feeling, sometimes validated, sometimes not, of having higher expectations than my peers. And it's, you pick up on these subtle cues where people say, I'm willing to take a risk on you to take this role. And it's like, well, why am I a risk and that person is not? And that kind of leads into this notion around the glass cliffs, which I think it's a terminology that's becoming more widely, known, which is really when either women or people of color are put into these roles that are, where the risk of failure is high. And so there's been those experiences of being on those brands that were high risk brands where you still had to kind of over deliver, and you felt a certain sense of pressure because this is something we've I think shared within our community, and I'll share it now, which is often we believe our failure is not our own, but our failure then becomes reflective of an entire group. And so we carry this extra burden of being the only one in the department, that if I don't succeed, then someone else may not get another opportunity, almost like the Jackie Robinson of pharma, on a brand team. And so the other burden, I'll wrap up quickly, is just there's often this pressure to be the expert on all things Black, and the Black community is not a monolith. And so culture and race are not necessarily the same. And so I'm Black, but my culture is Jamaican. And so there's certain things that I still need to learn and understand about the Black diaspora. And oftentimes you find yourself in a position being the only one having to kind of dispel certain myths that exist about the organization. So, for me, I think it's both a privilege to be in that position, but it's also a burden. And I think the final burden, and I'd love to to bring Bill into this, is that sometimes when you're on a brand team and he's working in sickle cell, when you're advocating for a diverse population, you have to provide so much evidence to make sure that people realize that this isn't about your own personal agenda. You're really pursuing a business opportunity. There's a disparity in the Black or Hispanic or Asian population, and I'm just making a commercial case, not one because I identify with that particular group.
Bill, what do you think? Similar experiences for you?
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree with Charlotte and Conrad more. I think, working in sickle cell disease today, one of the best experiences I had was actually working on a brand that disproportionately impacted Asian Americans, because what it forced me to do as a person of color is to put aside my own biases, that I had to immerse myself in a different culture. And one of the panelists earlier, was the head of our business unit at the time. And I think one of the things that we talked about is, let's use the data as a guide. And so, yes, that the presence of people of color is critically important. But to Conrad's point, we, the three of us, don't understand the diseases that we work in or the people that we look to serve by osmosis. We do the work, we put in the work. And I think one of the things that, Charlotte talked about, how you start to lose some of your confidence, is there's this fine line between being challenged and being questioned. And I'm all up for a challenge, right? Ask me, did I do the work? Ask me, do we have the analytics? But when questions begin with things like, are you sure? Well, it's very similar to the Super Bowl commercial that ran, right? Like, am I sure? No, not 100%, but I do have data that supports the decision that we're making. And that's something that you find, or at least I find or have found in my career, that tends to be asked more of me than of others, right? And so, this is where making sure that we continue to fight for roles that are really strategic or really close to the P&L or really close to development, as opposed to someone very early in your career steering you towards a sales leadership role or an operational role. These are the things that I think, Conrad and I have shared in our experiences, and Charlotte as well, right? Where, you tend to be marginalized at times because people just aren't used to seeing people like you in the room and asking the tough questions.
We're hearing from Bill and Conrad and even myself this extra burden that we deal with. And what I want to say as the physician, this is killing us. This additional burden, this emotional tax that we have to deal with, this state of always being on guard, it impacts our health, our well-being, and our productivity. And when you talk about the health disparities that exist within certain communities, we are the community. And this stress that we feel in our places of employment, whether it's, whether people do it intentionally or not, it really adds to those disparities that we're talking about out in the community. So I really think it's important to understand the connection between the two.
No, I was just going to add, I think, a small example that is people's discomfort with using the term Black or African American. They're not dirty words, right? But you see people become very uneasy when you have to talk about it, right? And so when people peer down the table at you, or, you see people turn away, that's the small examples of where, you're playing your role in the brand and you're also playing cultural ambassador, and you still have to get shit done. Right. And so you've got to figure out at times which one of these takes the priority. And this goes back to, I think, the point Conrad was making, which is, we can't always be the burden of, 400 years of what is the promise of Blacks in America.
Do you think it changes with the organization? I noticed that, Otsuka, I noticed some of the foreign-owned pharma companies seem to be a little bit more progressive than the American ones. Is that the case? Am I generalizing too much, Charlotte?
What I would say is I do think that there are differences based upon different companies. And as you've mentioned, some of them may be regional. I happen to think that Otsuka values diversity and walks the talk, if you will. It's one of the reasons why I'm there, given that this is an area of great importance to me. And you might say that me being a leader of an R&D part of the organization is evidence of the value in diversity that Otsuka has. So yes, I'll go ahead and raise my hand and say I'm super proud of the company that I'm with currently. And I think that we are a leader in this space.
And Bill, you're in a smaller organization, I suspect, from the sound of things. Is it different there with a smaller team? You've worked at a big pharma company, I'm assuming, as well, right?
I have, and I think, I've had the good fortune of working actually for Charlotte's CEO, so I understand how Kabir places value on that diversity. At Bluebird, I think, our chief bird has been super clear that we've had some blind spots, but to the credit of the organization, we brought on a head of diversity, equity, and inclusion in Jordan Blaze. And so making sure that we dedicate resources, and not just financial resources, but time and human resources to keep the conversation going, right? I think, the three of us talked about the fact that if anybody was doing it well, we may not be here today, right? Because if all companies in the industry were sort of ahead of the curve, we would need to have this discussion. So, I mean, I think, Conrad's got some really good ideas on that, so I don't want to take away some of his.
No, and I was just going to go to him next to say, in where you are, What are some of the experiences? By the way, I grew up with the Yardies in the East End of London, so we're going to have
All
to
right.
exchange some swordfish, man. But
Exactly.
you know, how are things at Merck? And diversity and inclusion seems to be a big thing, and has always been, I think, right?
So it's a great question, and I've had the privilege of working at an organization that's been led by Ken Frazier, who's been a very outspoken CEO on some of these topics that at some point may have been taboo for a CEO to be out there discussing. He'll be the first to tell you that he's done a good job in terms of his executive team, his leadership team, that we've done a good job with our board. But there's always more work that can be done. And I think, when you mentioned the topic of allyship earlier, often, less progress is made on diversity when it's being led by a person of color, because everyone then kind of says, well, that person is going to be the one to fix it. And so I do think that presents some challenges. But, what I admire about, our organization is that, the other word that people don't like to use a lot is this idea of systemic racism, right? And I think people should have a better appreciation for it, because it's saying we're not attacking the individual, we're attacking the system that allows certain beliefs or ideas or biases to be able to, have a negative impact on certain groups. And so, I think what I'm most proud of is that the organization has taken a step to really look at the structural things that might be creating some of the inequity or the disparities in terms of representation, and starting to address some of those issues in terms of, where are we recruiting? How are we recruiting? Are we just going to get talent, or are we working to cultivate talent? How are we interviewing? Are people taking unconscious bias training? What kind of questions are we asking? Are we making sure that we're looking out for bias in how we develop, promote, and retain our employees? And so I do think, for those on the line, that it's not the responsibility of one particular group to fix this issue, because we all contributed to it in some way, and we all can benefit from it. And I think that we have to give a little bit of grace, in order for people to make the progress, but we have to offer the training and create the room for people to have the dialogue. Because when a company comes down and says digital is how we're going to differentiate, everybody aligns around digital, everybody has an objective for digital, everyone gets trained on digital, and it becomes a culture change. Whereas often with diversity, it's at the corporate level and it's on the website, but then how does that get pulled through the rest of the organization, especially at that mid-level management perspective? And have we given people the tools and the space to be able to grow and develop? Because historically, your competencies in the space of D&I were not on the critical path for advancing within an organization. And I think because of the changing population dynamics and the globalization, that's no longer the case.
So that's a big question. One of the questions I always ask, and Charlotte, maybe we can start with you. We always have had diversity, inclusion, equity people, but they've never had teeth. Sometimes it's like, have you got one? Yes, meet so-and-so, right? That's our person. And they have a corner office. I work with a guy at Mount Sinai who's been there for 20 years. And it's only recently someone said, hey, we should get Calvin. He should have come to this meeting. So has that changed? Charlotte, Bill's laughing away over there. But Charlotte, let me start with you and then Bill.
As I was listening to Conrad, what I was thinking is, I think the reason why it's taking us so long to solve the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion is because we're not treating it like we treat every other business problem. We aren't identifying, full-time resources at the highest level, at the middle level. We're not giving budgets. It's somebody's volunteer job, and it gets deprioritized, even though we want it to be at the top of the list, or we want to make a change. And so we have to stop doing that. I mean, if I could say anything to those that are listening, this is a business problem, and it should be treated as a business problem. And it's not just about representation. It's also about our business and, who are we selling our products to? What do they look like? And we know there's been a lot of data collected that shows that companies that are more diverse perform better as it relates to businesses. And, I would like to just say to others, I heard recently that the CEO of Quest Diagnostics, he put together an organization, 7 FTEs, $100 million for them to drive health equity. And that is exactly what more companies need to do, and treat this as if it were digital medicine and we wanted to solve digital medicine. And I think we would move the needle quicker. And that's exactly what we need to do.
Is it a generational thing? I know, Charlotte, you're the youngest amongst us. So, but, would Amanda Gorman be hired tomorrow at Merck or at Otsuka, right? Because I see that younger generation coming through, and they're smart, they're amazing, they're doing amazing things. I work with so many young Black entrepreneurs that are just, do you think there is a change coming where this generation is saying, I'm not going to stand for that, I'm just going to plow in? Do you think that's happening as well at the same time? Bill, maybe?
I can't imagine, what I think we have to do is we have to tackle the systemic issues. And Conrad said this as well, because we can't bring in, yet another generation of, smart, talented, Black, Latino individuals and put them into systems that kill your spirit. We're smart, we're, talented as well. And it's the system. And so we have to attack those business processes, practices, and procedures that have long persisted that we know are contributing to the issue before we think about, and some of these generations are here. I mean, we have on my team, I have, a span of 5 generations on one team. So we know the teams are here. Now we need to attack the systemic racism that, our eyes have been open to since we've all been witnessing the atrocities over the past year, unfortunately.
Bill, what do you reckon?
I have to say I'm optimistic about the newer generation or younger generation coming into the workforce. It's a generation that, by all accounts, from what I can see, they're unapologetically who they are. And so I recall being a 24-year-old fresh in the industry and being afraid to tell people that I went to a historically Black college or university. I'm a proud Morehouse graduate, but I almost was afraid to tell people because I didn't want to have to explain it. I didn't want to have to explain, fraternities and sororities. And this generation are far more willing to be clear about, this is my authentic self, and I'm still smart and I'm still capable, but you're going to have to accept me at who I am. I hope that the work that I've done and the work that I continue to do will at least, blaze the path for someone behind me or someone next to me. But I think it's also important that, one of the points Charlotte made was, at all levels, right? This isn't a C-suite issue. This isn't an executive issue. This is the middle management issue. This is that anyone who's a leader of people to be able to set the expectation and demand that you're getting diverse slates of talent, that you're demanding that people consider what ultimately is the business issue, not just, well, this is what we've always done. And I think, having been fortunate to work on teams and have leaders who've encouraged that of me, I continue to push that with my team. I can't sit here and in all honesty say my team is made up of the United Nations or just a team full of Black marketers and we're just giving it to the world and we're doing a great job. But what I will say is the people on my team are willing to do the work. And if they're willing to do the work, just like I'm willing to do the work, I know for a fact we will continue to be successful, because part of doing the work is listening. And that listening is really, really important, particularly in pharma and biotech marketing, because we often are serving underserved groups. And because if you're not willing to listen to them, you've marginalized them just like everyone else has throughout their journey.
There's a Charlotte fan base that's appearing in the chat. So I don't know if you've paid people to be in the audience, Charlotte, but there's a whole group of fangirls and boys on there. So Conrad, go on, add to what Bill was saying, please.
Sure. I'm a bit more cautious when it comes to talking about the generation, because I feel when I hear that conversation comes up, I believe people think that it's going to solve itself, right? So they say, well, this generation is already the most diverse generation, so they're just naturally going to find their ways into our organization. But I think to the point earlier, if you still got those systemic roadblocks there, then it's not going to happen, right? And I think, from the gender perspective, women have been outpacing men in terms of bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, doctorate degrees, but then you look at their representation in key professions and it's not there. So that just having the pure numbers of women didn't solve the gender imbalance or the pay inequity that we see until someone is willing to kind of tackle the systemic issues that's causing that. And so, I think we tend to want to look for the easy way out sometimes of the self, solving kind of solution. But this is not something where you're going to be able to just let it take care of itself. And I think we've all alluded to a term, but we haven't mentioned it, which is you have to create the psychological safety for people to be able to feel like they can show up in an organization, be themselves, be authentic, speak their mind, and that they're not going to be punished or disenfranchised for being themselves. And so I think that's a piece of, the emotional intelligence for leaderships. We've spoken about that, but how do you then marry that with cultural competence to create psychological safety so that these individuals that you're trying to recruit into your organization can feel safe and that you can also maintain them within your organization? Because there's a high cost for turnover, just like there's a high cost for acquiring the talent.
I totally agree that the machinations that are there need to be dismantled a little bit and rebuilt, I suspect. So, we've got probably about 10 more minutes. What I'd like to do is look at some of the questions from Charlotte's fans. Heidi has an interesting conversation going on around allyship. She says allyship is much different than mentorship, which is very different from sponsorship. Do you think, Charlotte, that, we need to dismantle some of those things and refresh the diversity and inclusion mandates that are going on to include these differences so that people take into account those differences and sponsor the right people, mentor the right people, be allies to the right people?
Yeah. And what's so interesting is allyship is getting a lot of, I think, publicity. And we at Women of Color in Pharma introduced this notion that being an ally is a verb. You actually have to do something. Probably allyship, when we talk about what it means, to me, it's what are the small things that you're doing within your influence on a daily basis to promote or help the life of somebody, whether it's the personal or the professional life of somebody within your area. And it doesn't require that you be at, in positions of power. Like sponsorship is typically you are, opening the door for somebody using your credibility and your power to really help them and let them in. And mentorship, I think is probably on the other end, where you have someone that has experiences and they're willing to advise. But when I think about allyship, that really is, what are the active things that you're doing? Whether it's you notice that someone is being asked something or there's something implied and you step up to say, well, no, in fact, that isn't the way that I see it. This is the way I see it. Or, are you going to be willing to give an assignment to someone based on the promise and not their performance, their potential and not their performance. So when I think of allyship, that's what I think of. And what I find interesting is the Lean In data that comes out every year that McKinsey and Lean In puts out is when they ask senior executives, are you an ally? Those numbers were really low in terms of the proportion of them who said they were actually doing things to be allies. So I really think, we all need to think about, what can we do in where we are? And if we get enough people doing the right things to promote those who don't look like them, I think that we will then move the needle. I would like to say we haven't come far enough in doing that. And I think the expectation is that we need to do better.
Thank you, Charlotte. That's amazing. And I totally agree with you. Conrad, I would say there's a couple of themes going on here based on what Charlotte just said around, well, what can we do? So, Monique asked, can we talk about how we are bringing voices to the table? I think, Bill, you alluded that to a little bit. And then I think there was one from Mylene around how would we make this different? Bill, you're about to launch a product. How are you going to commercialize it with diverse voices? I remember going to a meeting once where the product was for African-American women, and the creative directors and the copywriters and everybody were all white women who had never experienced what the patient was going to go through, things like that, right? So what do we want to do? It's Conrad, with you first. What are we doing, and what can we do, and what can the audience do to bring those voices in either our daily lives? And then the last one was around how can people help take away some of the burden that we're feeling, that you guys are feeling on a daily basis. So let's take that. What are we doing about bringing the voices in first? Conrad, do you want to take that on?
So, I think one of the first things you can do is, I know that there's not only, Black representation on the call today. So for those people who are not from that Black Indigenous, community, they're already taking the first step, which is educating themselves. And I think Bill shared a great example of working on a product where he had to immerse himself in the Asian culture. And so I think part of it is going on that personal journey. And as you're flipping through the channels or you're subscribing to different things, as you're trying to evolve as a marketer and a leader, you should try to diversify the input. What are the sources of where you're taking in information? Look at your network. What does my network look like? Am I having lunch with people of color or Asian women or women in general? Is there diversity in my network of people who I can talk to learn from? And then I think the other piece of it is really looking at your suppliers. Do I have diverse suppliers? And as a brand leader, I've gone to my agency and say, this doesn't work for me. You are my agency partner for diabetes, which disproportionately impacts these communities, and you don't have the representation, and you don't have the knowledge, and I'm not going to pay you to go learn about our customers, right? And so I think those are some that you can do to bring those voices. And also, I'm very proud at Merck, we created a platform called Driven, which stands for Delivering Real Insights via Employee Networks. And so we leveraged our employee business resource groups to sound and serve as a consumer panel. And we did the A/B testing to show that many of the insights that we were getting from our EBRGs were no different than what we saw by going out. So we were creating value for the organization by minimizing costs for research, but also finding a way to be able to engage the employee base. So I think those are some of the things that you can do to bring that voice. And the last thing that Bill said is just listen. When I was leading the diabetes business, we started doing more ethnographic research. Yes, it's a little bit more costly, but man, what it meant for my team to walk the neighborhoods, to go into the stores, to see where people were living and where they shop and where they ate. That's a cultural transformation that you can pay forward. And so there's just different ways that you can do that, which I think has, an exponential benefit to the customer and also to the business.
I want to just applaud Conrad. And, the title of this is, what is it like to be, Black on a brand team? Had Conrad not been on the brand team and the leader of the brand team, he might not have had the power and the influence to actually make the decisions that he just made. And so, it's really important for those leaders who are out there listening to us. It's important to have diverse talent leading the brand team, because if you don't, knowing that the agency doesn't know what they're talking about, it takes a very sophisticated and skilled person to be able to do that. And to go against the large agencies to say, I'm going to go and hire a diverse supplier because the insights that I'm getting from this agency, I know that they're not the right ones. So it's important that we have not only be on the brand team, but be leaders. And both of these leaders that you all have chosen for this panel are examples, and we need more leaders. And if we have to make the table bigger, we need to make the table bigger to accommodate more diversity in powers and positions of power and influence, which is the brand team leader.
Amen. Amen. Bill, any thoughts on all of that? I mean, one of the areas was you're launching product. Do you take it as far as Conrad does with the agencies, or even who they work with, right? Are you saying to them, use media from Black-owned enterprises because that's more relevant than putting it on Medscape? I don't know. I'm just making it up.
No, and I have to say I'm quite proud of the work we've done with our agency partners. We launched a campaign at Bluebird called Spark Sickle Cell Change. And one of the things that we demanded, because I can't take all the credit, is on the agency side and in my role was that we wanted Black photographers. We wanted people who could capture the beauty of Blackness in a way that was going to be different than other photographers, right? And I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is you don't have to apologize for being where you are. And you know, I know early in my career that notion of being so grateful that you're here, you have to remember you've earned it, right? Like Conrad has earned that spot. Charlotte has earned her spot. And by earning your spot, you have every right to demand the right things for the business. And that's why I always go back to stay close to the P&L, right? If Conrad isn't running the brand, or if I'm not leading the brand, or Charlotte's not leading development, you don't have that. You don't have that ability to make that decision. Someone else is making that decision for you. So I think it's really, really important that we always understand that, yes, you've earned your way to where you are, and now you have a right to demand certain things or ask for certain things or hold people accountable to the standards that are within your organization. And that takes a lot of the subjectivity off of the table, or it doesn't allow people to run from things in a way that it becomes very soft and subjective of, well, I thought that. Well, okay, let's go back to the standard.
Guys, thank you so much for both your candor and your wisdom and guidance today. We're very quickly running out of time. I wish we could go for another hour. This is so fascinating, and I'm sure the people watching us and listening to us would probably want to do the same, but we can't. So one thing, 35 to 40 seconds each. And ladies first, Charlotte, what should the audience do when they leave here and go to their day jobs again in their kitchen, their dining room, their living room, or wherever they are? To each of you, what should they do? One piece of advice. So Charlotte, with you.
So just to repeat a couple of things that I've said, I think that they should sponsor someone who doesn't look like them, and also be an ally and understand what that means to actually be an ally. And the last thing that I would say is that they should identify someone in their organization, a person of color, and give them a positive stretch assignment. We need to get away from these glass cliffs.
Thank you. Amazing. Conrad, how about you?
Man, it's hard to follow Charlotte. You know, what I would say is, you know, number one, along the lines of allyship, you know, go on this journey from being an ally to one, to an ally to some, to an ally to all. And I think some people are more comfortable being an ally to just one person, but you're not going to get that impact until you're comfortable being an ally to all. The second thing is that know that any efforts and improvements that we make in diversity, equity, and inclusion doesn't just benefit the underserved group, it benefits everyone. And then the last thing is to just tell compelling stories, right? Tell the personal stories as well as the business story. And stories are what are repeated, and they're what really drive this cultural change. And so that would be my last thing, is to just don't underestimate the power of telling compelling stories.
Fantastic. Thank you. Bill, last word on you, sir. Come on, young man.
No pressure at all there. I mean, I've got Charlotte and Conrad, so I'll try. You know, for me, it's three takeaways, right? I think one is be an owner. Don't be a custodian. Don't just say I've got these projects and I just need to get this done. Ultimately, own what you're responsible for, and the more you can take that ownership mentality, that will compel it. That will move you forward on your own journey. The second thing, and it's similar to Conrad, which is not those compelling stories, but shed the light in a way that others don't see, because they are carrying those micro biases or there's that implicit bias, particularly as a person of color, right? It's not just saying, well, this is for Black people because I'm Black and I understand it. it's you're looking at it differently. You're not carrying that same baggage. I know others on the panels that have spoken about coming from different backgrounds, and Conrad talked about being Jamaican. Well, hell, I'm just a kid from Philly, right? Like, we see things differently. We didn't grow up in the same places, but we shed the light differently. And the last thing I'll say is bet on yourself. My time at Bristol Myers Squibb was wonderful, and I learned a ton. But it got to the point where I really had to say to myself, am I as good as I think I am? And I had to bet on myself that I could leave that fertile environment and try out a startup. And then I learned again. And then I'm at Bluebird now, and I continue to learn. But that ultimately is about betting on myself and my experiences and the people that invested in me.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for taking the time today to have this very important conversation. For the audience, thank you for your participation. I hope you learned something, but more importantly, that you will go do something. That's my advice. And with that, I'm going to leave my esteemed colleagues and say thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.